general idea is you want to walk from one point to another, walk through a scale. And if you get there too soon, add some chromatic notes. So if you don't want to walk all the time, because that'll get really boring, then you can jump around. But in order to sound like you're relating in any way to the chord changes, you want to jump around among notes of the chords. Now, you can jump all you want to in a situation like that. You can actually go, and that works just fine, as long as you ultimately lead into the chord. And you notice the last note I play before the new chord is always close by the first, is always close by the note I'm aiming at, a whole step or a half step away from it. Or so that alone will get you making a reasonable bass line that works pretty well. Now you want to combine some chords with that. If you're playing the bass line with your first finger, you've only got 3 other fingers around to make the chord, unless you use your thumb somewhere. We won't do that. So let's get this 13th chord with the other 3 fingers. So now we're going to get this. We use the C9 this way. You may find that you want to do this. I'll talk about later about reasons you might want to use alternate fingerings. So let's build this up with a very simple rhythm first, which is no rhythm except for the bass. Okay, doesn't really sound like too much. Usually when you're comping on in swing, you don't just play whole notes in the chords. It's a lot more effective to come up with some kind of rhythmic pattern that works. And one that I discovered after doing this for several years that I was doing all the time was this one. And that turns out for some reason to be pretty easy. Now, the trick to this is getting your bass to be legato while you're making the chords nice and staccato. Notice I didn't go. Instead I went. But at the same time, the bass was nice and legato underneath. And by getting this kind of contrast in legato versus staccato of the different parts, what you really do is emphasize the difference in the two and make it seem bigger than it is. It's still just the guitar, but you give the effect of 2 or more different instruments this way. It turns out to be really important in solo guitar style. And I think it's one of the places where guitarists' ears just tend to turn off at the point where they're going through all the complexity of working this stuff out in the first place. It's very easy to lose sight of the thing that got you hooked on this idea in the first place, which was getting those sounds out of your instrument that you're used to hearing. So in some other style, you may want to have a really staccato bass line while you've got a legato chord part, or every possible mixture of those two as the parts go by. It's just worth keeping your eyes open, and especially your ears open. Don't let them close up when things get really rough, which they do periodically. So anyway, let's get back to some of the rhythms that you can use here. There's not a lot of variety in the bass rhythm. Of course, you can do little ornaments. So we'll worry about those kinds of things later, but the basic pulse in the bass line is obviously just repeated quarter notes. On the top, on the other hand, you're completely free, and if you listen to piano players and guitar players comp, which is what you should really do, you'll see every possible rhythm that you can imagine. And I know from my own experience, this solo guitar thing developed, or the duo accompaniment guitar style developed completely on the gig. Patty and I got together, and I'd played in 200 or 300 bands before I started doing this. And we decided, well, let's go get some work in the meantime as a duo. That should be easy, and it'll be quick, and we like playing together. And so we had to work before we knew how to do it, especially before I had any idea of how to keep this stuff together. And so all my learning of this stuff just happened on the gig based on other music that I'd played. And then later on I started analyzing it, mainly as I started having students who wanted me to break it down. And it was at that point that I discovered certain rhythms that were showing up over and over. But I realized that the rhythms that I'd pulled out just came from the listening that I'd done, whether it was to a Miles Davis quintet or to a big band or whatever it was. I was listening to those different kinds of rhythms. So again, at the risk of overstating this point, you can get some of these ideas from me, and especially you can see how I as a guitarist have put them together on the guitar. But don't stick with the kinds of elementary rhythms that I'm suggesting, which would be enough to see you through for a lifetime, really. Instead, listen to the music you love, whether it's coming out of your fingers or somebody else's fingers. Listen to that music and find the kinds of rhythms that really hit you, and then just figure out a way to do it. So let's pretend that the rhythm that you love the very most is one of the ones that I'm about to show you. I mentioned before the one that I discovered after about 2 years that I was playing very consistently, which was this. Now, a variation on that would be to sustain the last note. And you notice you run into all kinds of fingering problems as you go along. One of the things that always happens is that guitarists who do something a lot make that look very easy, and you don't see all the kinds of things that they've wrestled with along the way. And if you haven't played the style that much, you might find that you're wrestling with all kinds of things that it looks like just somehow magically don't exist for me. And of course, the truth is that I wrestled with all the same things that you're about to or already have yourself. And in many cases, you're going to come up against a decision: do I do it this way or do I do it that way? And for a long time, I had the opinion that you should either do it this way or you should do it that way. And now I've come up with the opinion that you should do it both ways and any other way you can think of. And that way you'll be flexible enough to do it however you want to when the time comes up. And here I'm referring specifically to things like, do you finger the bass line on this string? Or do you put it here? Well, it has a lot to do with what you're going to do with the higher part. Well, the best example I can come up with at the moment has to do with, let's say you're walking back down from this chord. You get to this point. Should you have fingered it here? Or should you have fingered it here? Maybe should you have fingered it this way? You can come up with all kinds of different fingerings. And the answer is, for flexibility, do it every possible way you can think of. Because the whole goal with this is to be like you would if you were just doing one of these parts. You'd be nice and free and relaxed. Let's imagine you've played the style for years. It's very conversational for you. You're free to improvise, respond to whatever you're hearing around you. After all, you're responding to somebody else you're playing with. If you're locked into always fingering it the same way, then you don't have that kind of freedom. One of the great things about watching a guitarist like Joe Pass is you can see almost infinite freedom in his fingerings. At any point, he can go from any note to any other note, seemingly anywhere on the neck, and he's not locked into a particular pattern or a particular musical pattern that he's played over and over again. It's all really free. So the argument is to finger these in any way you can. Of course, now when you're just going for it, which is what I did for the first many years that I did this style, get anything you can, and with the fingers that are left over, get anything else that's available, and just good luck, basically. So another rhythm that that you can use, and the reason I got off on this was talking about sustained notes. As soon as you get sustained notes, it gets a little bit more difficult because you've got to be moving a bass line around at the same time that you're holding down a chord. And you get into this thing where before you were forcing yourself to be legato in the bass and staccato in the chords. Now you've got a whole different approach going on. The extreme of this would be whole notes like we were talking about before. Okay, now here's an interesting fingering problem. I won't get into too many of these, but how are you possibly going to go and then play a bass line that goes without letting this chord up? Well, there you get into questions of altering your technique, for example, or altering your fingering. Maybe you'll finger it this way, which takes care of all that, but now what are you going to do about that A flat? You don't have any fingers on the other side of this one. Well, you got your thumb